You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Leymiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. Have you ever felt this way about someone before? You can't stop thinking about them. They're the first thing on your mind when you wake up and the last thing you think about before you fall asleep. When you hear from them, you feel ecstatic. And when you don't, you just feel empty. If you've ever had these intense, inexplicable, all-consuming feelings about someone else, you're definitely not alone. I've had them before too. This experience has a name. It's called limerence. In today's show, we're going to unpack what it is, where it comes from, and why the human brain is capable of getting so powerfully attached to another person, sometimes in ways that don't actually serve us very well. Limerence is a double-edged sword. When the other person reciprocates our feelings and is a good match for us, it's amazing. But when we develop these feelings for someone who doesn't return them, or who keeps us hanging because they just like the attention, it can be downright awful. My guest is Dr. Tom Bellamy, a neuroscientist and honorary associate professor at the University of Nottingham. He has published over 40 scientific papers, abstracts, and book chapters on neurophysiology. He runs the popular blog, Living with Limerence, and he is the author of the new book, Smitten, Romantic Obsession, The Neuroscience of Limerence, and How to Make Love Last. This is going to be a fascinating conversation that will help you to better understand the science behind romantic obsession, attraction, and love. Stick around, and we're going to jump in right after the break. Many couples tend to drift apart over time, but it's rarely because of one big fight. It's about life getting busy, distractions piling up, and slowly losing that close connection that you cherished and that seemed to come so effortlessly in the honeymoon phase. This is why somewhere between 30 and 40% of first marriages end in divorce. It's usually not from a lack of love, but from a lack of intentional connection. However, it doesn't have to be this way, and that's where Paired comes in, the #1 couples app that helps to improve your relationship and that takes just minutes each day. Curated by relationship therapists, Paired uses expert-backed research to support making a lasting impact for couples. Here's how it works. You and your partner download the app and pair together. Every day, Paired sends you a 5-minute game, quiz, or question designed to deepen your relationship. Answer on your own time, and once you're done, Paired will reveal your partner's response so that you can have an open, stress-free, and honest conversation. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I love the games on this app. For example, there's one about your sexual bucket list that encourages you to share some of the things that you've always wanted to try in bed, but haven't done yet. This is such a great way to learn about each other's wants and desires and to find your common ground. I found exercises like this to be so useful in my own life because turning conversations about delicate topics like this into a game just makes it feel easy and fun instead of stressful. Practice making your relationship a priority every day with Paired. Head to paired.com/Justin to get a 7-day free trial and 25% off if you sign up for a subscription. That's paired.com/Justin to sign up today. Hi, Tom, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here. So you've just published a new book titled Smitten, which is all about the neuroscience of limerence. In your work, you're very careful to distinguish limerence from other forms of romantic attraction. So let's start there. What do you mean when you say the word limerence? And how is that similar to or different from terms that people might be more familiar with, like love or lust?
Yeah, so limerence I think of as an altered state of mind. So I look at it from that neuroscience perspective, that it's a mental state of intense infatuation, of obsessive infatuation with another person, and a very strong drive to form a pair bond with that person. So there's certainly kind of an erotic element to it usually for people in that their libido is enhanced when they're in this state of limerence. But the primary concern, I suppose, for those people is reciprocation of feeling. So that desire to form a powerful bond, what the originator of the term, Dorothy Tenoff, calls the ecstatic union. So limerence, as defined by Tenoff and as understood by me, is all about that altered state of mind. And that's a kind of a state that people find themselves in during the early stages of love. So when people would say, oh, I feel like I'm in love, for people that experience limerence, what that practically means is being in this altered state of intense infatuation. So not everybody experiences this. So this is one of the key insights from Tenoff's work, and that I kind of draw attention to in the book, is that about 50% of the population experienced limerence as the early phase of romantic love. And so it's defined by particular symptoms like, intense arousal, euphoria when you're with your limerent object and you're getting a sense that they're interested in you too. So when there's some reciprocation, you have euphoria, but your mood swings intensely so that if there's a sense that things aren't going well with the other person, then you can obviously fall into panic and kind of a sense of emotional devastation and a kind of a desire to rekindle the connection. And so limerents daydream about their limerent object, the person that they're infatuated with, continually. And that can progress into a state of sort of intrusive thoughts, which you can't even control. So the kind of old saying of, I can't get them out of my head, is literally true. They are constantly intruding, making it difficult to concentrate on other things, do other tasks, and so on. So limerence, as experienced, if you've been through it, that kind of description is going to be very familiar to you. And probably your reaction is going to be, well, that's just love. You don't need a special word for that. That's what the poets talk about. That's what all the romantic movies are about. That's what all the great love stories are about. That's just love. If you haven't experienced the state, though, probably you'll be thinking, well, that sounds a bit unhealthy. That sounds obsessive. That sounds emotionally unstable. And so that distinction that some people fall into this state of limerence in an early phase of love and others don't, I think is also responsible for an awful lot of heartache. That when people come together and one of the people is a limerent and the other is not, they'll have such profoundly different expectations about how love feels, how people that are in love behave, and the hope that their own needs, expectations, desires will be reflected back to them is just never satisfied because they've got such a kind of fundamental mismatch in the way that they experience early love.
Yeah, and I think what you're getting at there is one of the reasons why the word love itself is so hard to define in a way that everybody kind of has a shared understanding of it, because people's experiences with love can be all over the map and can be very, very different in terms of the intensity and everything that goes into it. But one of the things that I think is really striking about limerence is just how overwhelming it can feel. People describe it as intrusive, obsessive, euphoric, and also painful at the same time. So what's going on psychologically and neurologically that makes limerence so all-consuming? What's happening in the brain that makes this such an intense experience?
Yeah, so the state of limerence, I keep emphasizing it because I really do think it is essentially a different cognitive mode for the brain. Mm-hmm. So the root of it is essentially the same root as addictions. The way that our brain's structured is we've got these systems built in, some of which are very evolutionarily ancient, and they kind of run in parallel and they have particular purposes that, obviously serve our needs. But those systems don't always run together harmoniously, if we can put it that way. So to make it more concrete, so limerence is mainly about the action of three different systems within the brain. The arousal system, so that's the system that makes us feel kind of excited and energized. So it's the kind of famous flight or fight response where you kind of get amped up and your heart beats faster and your pupils dilate and you're kind of ready for action. So the arousal system is important. The second system is the reward system. So this is familiar now in popular culture as the dopamine-based system in the brain that allows us to recognize rewards, but it also motivates us to seek rewards. And so the reward system is kind of complex in the way that it kind of encodes rewards and it motivates us. But the key thing that dopamine drives is wanting. So that desire for things, the pursuit impulse, if you like. So reward is the second important system. The third important system is the bonding system. So that's much more about attachment and about kind of social connection. So that's mostly about the hormones or neuropeptides, oxytocin and vasopressin. And they allow us to kind of recognize social cues and social rewards. And they promote a kind of feeling of affinity and connection to another person and attachment. So what limerence seems to be is the combination of arousal and excitement at the same time as a powerful romantic reward. So recognizing that this person is a sort of desirable potential partner or potential mate from an evolutionary perspective, combined with feelings of closeness, feelings of special connection, feelings of kind of really strong affinity to that other person through the bonding system. And what can happen, I think, and this is extrapolating a little bit from experimental research in, other species rather than in humans, but the combination of reward and bonding together can kind of imprint one person as a very powerful natural reward. So that person becomes almost the embodiment of romantic importance, romantic potential for you. And so being with them gives you an extraordinary natural high. And the natural high can be so powerful that it can essentially become addictive. Mm-hmm. And so like other highs, chemical or natural or behavioral, if it's strong enough, it's possible to become addicted to that high under kind of the wrong circumstances. Although limerence, as experienced, is a fantastic experience. It feels wonderful. It feels euphoric, energizing, exciting. And so if you are able to form a healthy bond, a healthy connection with the person that you've become limerent for, it can actually result in a very happy relationship that then does develop and mature. So I don't look at limerence as always being a negative thing, but there's definitely circumstances under which becoming limerent for the wrong person, somebody that you can't bond with or who isn't good for you, can become a real emotional and psychological burden.
Yeah, limerence is definitely a double-edged sword. And, whether it's a positive or negative influence in somebody's life is really going to depend on the specific circumstances there. But thanks for explaining that sort of neuroscience behind limerence. I think when you understand all the different brain systems that are involved, it helps to explain why it is such an intense experience and how it can be so euphoric, but also so painful at the same time if you're not able to have that attraction reciprocated, or that other person doesn't seem to be as interested in you. And that actually feeds into my next question, which was that, something you talk about in the book is that limerence often emerges in situations where the other person is unavailable or inconsistent, or their intentions are ambiguous. So I wanted to ask, why is uncertainty such a powerful fuel for limerence? Why do we become limerent for people when we aren't even sure if the feeling is reciprocated?
Yeah, uncertainty seems to be essentially the rocket fuel for limerence. So uncertainty will drive that state of sort of excitement and attraction and reward into later stages of addiction, where it feels much more negative for the person going through it. So it's, the cravings and the impulses and the intrusive thoughts and those sorts of things that you kind of would characterize a later stage addiction, where you're now sort of seeking out this other person to try and get relief from discomfort, rather than because they're so rewarding that you want, more of their company. A lot of that is in kind of classic psychology, in the sense that the way that the reward system in the brain works is it actually is geared to detect errors. So it's a reward prediction error system. So this is kind of a little sophisticated, but it's about the way that the strength of the dopamine signal varies depending on how predictable the reward that you receive is. So obviously, the system is geared up to help us reliably identify rewarding things in the environment. So that might be good food, it might be a mate, it might be security, comfort. But if you can predictably secure the reward, then there's no kind of error signal. So if you get an unexpected reward, so let's say you're just exploring the environment and you discover a juicy fruit and you taste it and it's delicious and full of sugar and you feel, this is lovely. That would cause a spike of dopamine because it was an unexpected reward. So it's not predicted. So the error was you didn't expect it to be there, essentially. And so you get a spike of dopamine. Once you've learned that there's a source of rewards that you can reliably access, now the dopamine spike doesn't happen when you get the reward. The dopamine spike happens a little earlier and it motivates you to go and seek that reward. Now, if you seek the reward and don't get it, that's another error signal. So actually at that point, your dopamine drops and that's signaling the sort of failure to secure the reward. So if you have a situation where your behavior allows you to predictably get the reward system will essentially desensitize. In neuroscience terms, it habituates. You get used to it. So you know that you can go and get that reward when you want it in a predictable way. And so you don't crave it. You don't want it intensely because it's okay. It's secured. You've kind of learned that well. But rewards that you can't predict. So intermittent rewards that come without a predictable pattern, people that behave in ways that you can't really make sense of. So sometimes they're very warm, sometimes they're very open, but then they're very cold, and sometimes they're texting you into the early hours of the night. And then the next time you text them, they don't respond for 24 hours, those sorts of things where you can't reliably work out and learn how what you're doing leads to the reward, they're very sticky. And so they get kind of ingrained and they get sensitized. So rather than quieting down because you've successfully learned what causes the reward, it can get intensified. And so you can want the reward even more strongly. Again, that's the mechanistic basis of what most of us learn just through our life experience, that things that we can get easily, we don't want them as strongly as things that we want but can't access. And so, the classic example of this would be Skinner's experiments, where he was giving food pellets to pigeons that were pecking a lever in a cage. And if they peck at the lever and they get a food pellet, that's fine. They just learn that and they peck whenever they're hungry. But if they peck and the pellets are delivered randomly, they never learn because there's no pattern. And so these pigeons would kind of go crazy in these boxes, trying to figure out what it was in their behavior that was leading to the delivery of the food pellet. And of course, they can't learn it because it's just happening randomly. And so they even ended up developing what he called superstitions, where they'd be sort of dancing around or moving their wings or whatever, that they tried to conceptualize it in terms of what was happening just before I got the food pellet. And so they engaged in all this kind of crazy behavior. It's sad but true to see people behaving in much the same way, that, when they can't secure it, when they can't predict how this person's going to behave or how strong the connection is, whether or not they reciprocate, that just makes that other person all the more desirable and makes it all the more likely that they're going to end up getting into that state of person addiction, where the reward system is compelling them with a sort of irresistible motivation to keep trying to connect to that person, that unpredictable, uncertain person.
Yeah. And that's why playing hard to get works to some extent
Yes.
in the world of dating, right? Because it feeds this sense of uncertainty that motivates and drives interest in romantic attention. And I'm not saying like people should intentionally play hard to get, and, playing hard to get can backfire. If you're too hard to get, people can lose interest entirely, right? But it's part of the reason why it does work to some extent in dating. As I love to say on this show, masturbation isn't anything to be ashamed of, and pleasure doesn't need to look one way. Our sponsor, Erica Lust, is here to reimagine how we see and feel pleasure. Erica Lust is an award-winning filmmaker and the force behind the world's leading platform for ethical, cinematic adult films. With Erica Lust, you get more than porn. You get real intimacy, real orgasms, real stories. Every film is made with consent, craft, and care, from casting to climax. Whether you're watching solo or with a partner, Erica Lust's work celebrates what actually turns people on, with equal pleasure for everyone involved. And right now, Erica Lust is offering our listeners 45% off your subscription when you enter the code Justin at ericalust.com. That's Erica Lust with a K. Check the show notes for the link or visit ericalust.com and use promo code Justin. What do you learn when you track 136,000 erections? A heck of a lot. And FirmTech is using that breakthrough data to transform men's sexual health. Here's why that matters. ED is usually treated by guesswork, but FirmTech's Tech Ring finally gives men and their doctors real data. How firm you're getting, how long you're staying there, whether your medications are working, and whether things like pumps, PRP, or shockwave therapy will actually do anything for you. It can even help optimize your dosing for ED meds, and they've got the science to back all of this up. But my favorite part is that the Tech Ring doesn't just measure erections, it improves them. FirmTech's design helps keep more blood in the penis, giving you harder erections, more confidence, and more intense orgasms. In fact, studies show that for certain men, it performs on par with taking 10 milligrams of tadalafil. Remember, pills help get blood in, rings help keep it there. And FirmTech's database revealed something big. For most guys, fading erections aren't dysfunction, they're venous leak. You get hard, and then you lose it. The Tech Ring can spot that early, long before you consciously notice it. It can also flag cardiovascular-related ED, which is the kind that you really want to pay attention to. The bottom line is that we're all somewhere on the spectrum from erectile fitness to erectile dysfunction. FirmTech gives you the tools and the data to stop or even reverse that trend. Check the show notes for the link and save 15% off your FirmTech order by using Justin15 as the discount code. Stay fit, stay firm. Everything that you were talking about there has me thinking about the whole modern dating landscape and how it's almost designed to cultivate a bunch of uncertainty. If you think about dating apps and how people get ghosted frequently, or how unpredictable it is in terms of when you're going to get a response from a profile that you liked or somebody that you sent a message to, it creates that sense of uncertainty. And then you have all of these modern relationship styles like situationships that are ambiguous by nature, right? They're not clearly friendships, but they're also not romantic relationships. They're somewhere in between. And does this person actually want to have a romantic relationship eventually? And so I was just wondering about, what's your take on the modern dating world? Does it make limerence even more likely to emerge just because there seems to be so much uncertainty that's built into it, and more uncertainty than there was in the past?
Yes. There you go. Simple answer. Yes, it does. In many ways, exactly as you've identified, a lot of the features of dating apps, the way that dating's kind of progressed and the culture around dating has changed over the last couple of decades, feeds that combination of hope and uncertainty that's so essential for limerence to develop. That there's lots of reasons why you would think somebody's interested with you if they're engaging with you on the app or hooking up even. Clearly, you're getting very strong indication that they're attracted to you, that they're interested in you romantically. But then, exactly as you say, it's very easy to ghost somebody, to break it off, to behave in an unpredictable manner. It makes it easy to cancel dates at a moment's notice. The other thing that's underappreciated, how significant a change it is that dating used to be much more openly social in the past, so that you would tend to meet people in your existing social circle. So it would be people that you worked with, or people at university, or people that you study with, or friends of the family, or kind of extended friendship networks. And so you would tend to meet that person first in a social context and then get to know them and then start getting more intimate and, it becoming more romantic and sexual. But B, other people within your social network would be aware that it was happening. So it would be a normal part of social life that friends would be connecting. Now people seem to have, partly to a differing extent, but they've sort of segregated dating, particularly if they're users of the apps, from their social life. So they have friends, they've got a community around them and so on, but the app is a private enterprise. They're looking at that, they're connecting with people they don't know who are outside of it, and that it starts primarily with a sexual expectation, even if that's not how any individual person wants to begin things. It's always out there that this is about sexual connection primarily, but hopefully in many people's case it will be with the longer term development of feelings. And so it's kind of an inversion of the old pattern of getting to know somebody socially, getting to like them at the level of sort of personality and so on, and then maybe starting a romantic connection and a sexual connection that could deepen, to flipping that and having fairly casual connections with strangers and hoping that maybe that would then develop. But of course, because it's starting in that casual way, and because some people are only using the apps for a sexual hookup, the sort of follow-on can very often be a complete ghosting or a very casual, a very sort of half-hearted continuation of the connection. And so for somebody who is developing limerence, you've got the combination of the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty built into that because it's not a connection that evolved naturally kind of in a social setting. Plus, if you are having sex with people, you're going to be getting a massive release of oxytocin from skin-to-skin contact and from orgasm at the point at which you're kind of also getting the excitement of early romance and early bonding and all of that, arousal and a romantic possibility and romantic reward. And so you're really strengthening that mental psychological connection, and literally in the neurophysiology, you're connecting that person with reward, social and romantic. Mm-hmm. So all of that is going to make life on the dating apps very hard for limerence.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And, you were talking about how the nature of dating used to be a lot more social in the past. And today, our dating tends to occur in this much more solitary, private fashion. And so we're also not getting the social feedback or validation from our friends and other people who might in the past have known this person that we might be seeing or have these limerent feelings for. And they could confirm that, yeah, that person's into you, or they really seem to like you. And so we're not getting that when we're on the apps and we just have these ambiguous texts. And yeah, we could show those texts to our friends, but they're not going to have any more information than we do because they don't have that, same sort of connection to the person that maybe in the past, or if you went on double dates with people, like other people could see and recognize that there's like this mutual reciprocated attraction there. Something that I wanted to talk about goes back to what you were discussing at the beginning of the show, which was how only about half of the population seems to experience limerence. So why is that? What do we know about what makes some people more likely to have this experience? Is it about, for example, their attachment style or their personality? What do we know about that?
So attachment style is certainly a factor within it. And many people do talk about limerence from that perspective. So the obvious connection is that people who have an anxious attachment style will have that excitement and all of the up experiences, the sort of positive emotional response at the beginning, but then also the anxiety and insecurity about the strength of the bond and the kind of mood swings when the bond seems to be in jeopardy or when there's uncertainty around it. But it's a lot more complicated than that. So I don't see limerence as an attachment issue primarily. There's clearly something about the nature of the reward system and the stability of the reward system, that some people do seem to have a propensity for their reward systems to get activated into this kind of unstable, sensitizing state where one person becomes a very powerful source of reward. So it's speculative, but I often think it'd be really interesting to know, do limerence have a lot of oxytocin receptors in the reward centers of the brain and things like that? So, usually whenever you're thinking about some aspect of human behavior, there's going to be a genetic element in that some people just have a kind of predisposition to it. There's going to be a developmental element. So, as we're growing and going through experience in, a complex social world, our brains develop accordingly. And so we learn lessons, and literally the brain wires itself in response to feedback from the environment. So that's when you can think about things like attachment issues coming in and maybe, sensitizing the reward system or making it more unstable. And so it's going to be a combination of factors. I ran a survey to try and estimate the prevalence of limerence in the general population. So I have a website, livingwithlimerence.com, where I talk a lot about limerence, write a lot about limerence, and thousands of people come and share their stories. But obviously that's quite biased. So I kind of developed this understanding of limerence from the perspective of talking to people that were going through it. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to sort of see, well, actually, how common is it? And so I ran a survey with a marketing firm, actually, who sent out a questionnaire at random to 1,500 adults in the US and UK, and essentially just gave a description of limerence and said, have you ever experienced this state? And I then asked a few kind of demographic questions after that. So the results of that were that about half, a little over half of the people that I asked said, yes, they had experienced limerence. Of those, half said it had been so bad an experience in their life that it had, spoiled their quality of life, that it had been so psychologically distressing that it made it hard to enjoy life. So that would suggest that of the people that have experienced limerence, about half have had it as such a negative experience that you would start to think, is this something that needs support, therapy, treatment, because obviously it's affecting quality of life. It's both men and women equally. So there's no apparent gender difference between men and women as to whether or not they experience limerence. Extroverts, introverts, again, much the same. There's a slight tendency for extroverts to experience limerence more often than introverts, despite the fact that introverts have a very rich fantasy life in their minds and they'll ruminate and daydream about their limerent objects all the time. It's kind of roughly equal, slight preference for extroverts. No association, as far as we can tell, with sexual orientation. So heterosexual, homosexual have it to the same extent. Again, some indication that bisexual people have a greater tendency to experience limerence. Again, I don't want to make too much of that because there weren't that many bisexual people in the survey, so it's kind of hard to know for sure. But there's some interesting speculation there potentially. Mm-hmm. The number one thing was anxious attachment. So when I asked people, do you recognize this description of attachment style? And I gave a brief summary of anxious attachment. 78% of the people who had anxious attachment said that they reported limerence. So that was easily the strongest correlation in anything that I looked at to suggest that certainly if you have an anxious attachment style, you are very likely to experience limerence. That said, it still means, 20% of people that have anxious attachment don't experience limerence. Mm-hmm. And for people who have a secure attachment style or avoidant attachment style, again, it's about 50% still experience limerence. So it's not required, but clearly there is some overlap in the neuroscience, the neurophysiology of anxious attachment and neurophysiology of limerence.
Yeah, it's so interesting and highlights how much more work needs to be done to really better understand what's going on here and who is most likely to experience it and why. But this has been absolutely fascinating, Tom, and I'm really looking forward to continuing our conversation in the next episode where we're going to talk all about overcoming limerence when it becomes a problem in your life. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work and get a copy of your new book?
Sure, yes. So the blog is livingwithlimerence.com. I also have a YouTube channel, which is at Dr. Tom Bellamy. The book is going to be out in the US on the 3rd of February. It's already out in the UK. You can probably tell from my accent, I'm based in the UK. And so, yeah, those are the places to find me online.
Well, great. And I'll be sure to include links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
You're very welcome. It was great talking to you.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.